this story is really important.
Okay.
So, a black principal in Texas, in the Fort Worth area, has been forced to resign from his job after being accused of promoting, pushing, advocating for critical race theory. That's not what he did. There's no evidence, according to NBC News, of him promoting critical race theory at all. But he sent out an email referencing George Floyd and saying how there is systemic racism, and parents were outraged over that line. And he has now lost his job. Listen to this.
Dr. James Whitfield, the first black principal at Colleyville Heritage High School, officially removed from his position during an emotional school board meeting. All of it over what he says was a false accusation of promoting critical race theory.
Education is my heart and soul.
The Grapevine Colleyville School District acknowledges there's no evidence Dr. Whitfield promoted critical race theory, the study of law and racial inequality. But anger in the community has focused on an email he sent after George Floyd's murder, in which he said systemic racism was alive and well.
Tonight, I would like to express my concerns.
It was the resident who initiated public criticism of Dr. Whitfield last summer who made final remarks at the school board meeting last night.
The question should be asked, how did we get here? Critical race theory, equity, critical race theory, equity, social emotional learning.
Where do you go from here?
I've got a family that needs me. It's bigger than me.
The district told NBC News that Whitfield lost his job due to deficiencies in his performance. The former principal, who had been promoted twice before within the district, denies that claim.
Did you hear that line? The school district said he was fired for deficiencies in his performance, although he was promoted twice. Want y'all to know this isn't his first time having an incident with the school district. Back in 2019, an official allegedly with the school district told him to remove a picture from his Facebook page of him kissing his wife, who was white. They said remove it, allegedly, to not stir up any trouble. And now he has been fired over this alleged critical race theory foolishness. Keith, your thoughts?
Well, sadly, when I listen to the story, and I think about the hype and hysteria surrounding critical race theory, which is all manufactured outrage for a legal theory that has been around since the 1980s. I'm reminded of two different points in our history. One is the Salem witch trials of the 1600s, and the other is the Red Scare of the 1950s, the Joe McCarthy era. And I think we are in this era again, where people are being targeted, profiled, attacked, not by quote unquote cancel culture that conservatives are always complaining about, but by a group of fearful people who are afraid of the challenges to white supremacy. When people talk about critical race theory, A, they don't know what they're talking about because it doesn't mean what they think it means. B, it's not being taught in schools, as Reese pointed out. And C, the real thing that they're afraid of is not about critical theory, it's about race. It's about any conversation of race that challenges white privilege and white supremacy. The real fear here, the underlying cause of this controversy, is that white America does not want to address or atone for its past and the effects of the past on the present. So they will do everything possible to prevent any conversation about that past or any conversation about the legacy of the past, the vestiges of slavery and segregation and racism and white supremacy that persist today. And this is something that, you know, I wrote about this in my book about Ronald Reagan. He was the one who I think first taught me this lesson, if you will. What Reagan did, the genius of Reagan, if you will, maybe you call it evil genius, is that he convinced white people that they didn't have to feel guilty about anything again. Because Jimmy Carter made white people feel guilty. He made them feel guilty about America's imperialism, about America's wars, about American intervention in Iran. He made them feel guilty about all the things that America had done wrong, so to speak. And here comes Ronald Reagan and convinces white people, you don't have to worry about those black people. You don't have to feel guilty about being racist, about not wanting to have your kids go to school with them. You don't have to feel guilty about wanting states' rights. You don't have to feel guilty about America's imperialism abroad. And America's this shining city on the hill that is practically perfect. And that was the mythology that white people wanted to buy into. And it's not true, but they desperately need to believe this. White innocence is incredibly important for white people to believe in order for them to believe that their status is justified, that they live in a meritocracy which does not exist, and that they don't necessarily benefit from white privilege. Which they do.
Give him a ding, please.
Okay, ding, 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 ding. Tuh.
That was it. Thank you for that context of Ronald Reagan, because people always praise Saint Ronald Reagan. Oh, I'm a Reagan Republican. I'm a Reagan Republican. When I've always said I believe Reagan was even more destructive than Donald Trump, because Reagan had 2 terms. He created some horrific policy. And I always remind folks Reagan tried to veto the 1987 Civil Rights Act.
And he was opposed, since F. David de Klerk was in the news for dying, Reagan was opposed to lifting the sanctions imposing sanctions
South Africa.
on South Africa. He was opposed to
He
sanctions.
supported apartheid. He supported apartheid.
Yeah.
Ronald Reagan, and they call him, and welfare queen narrative. I mean, the 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act, the 1988 Anti-Drug Abuse Act, which would eventually turn into the 1994 Crime Reform Bill. But folks think that Crime Reform Bill started just out of nowhere. The ball was rolling under the Reagan administration. So I thank you for that. Reese, your thoughts on this man losing his job because parents feel like he was pushing something that there's no evidence of it. That's the other thing. According to the investigation, there was no evidence of it.
What evidence do you need other than the fact that he's a Black man and his very presence is a threat to their white supremacy? And what's so just sickening is that white supremacy is just relentless. It's counterproductive, actually. Like, how is anybody well served from this principal who was beloved by his students, who was actually doing a good job, being removed over a fictional thing? It's so frustrating that in every aspect of our society right now, there's a breakdown in facts actually driving any kind of actions. You know what I'm saying? It's like this whole critical race theory is not a thing to even be. It's, COVID, anti-vax. It's all of these people who are driven by fantasy, by conspiracy.
Police aren't being funded.
it's they're the ones who are racking up win after win because they're relentless with how they go after people. And I think that him having a white wife played a big role in it. Maybe he was asked to remove it, but this guy who went after him, maybe that was the real impetus, because how white men kind of tend to feel about that. They have their little nicknames for him that I won't repeat. But it's really frustrating because I just feel overwhelmed with how little facts even matter anymore. And what's so frustrating, going back to what he said about this false notion of a meritocracy, please, it just does not exist, even though white folks want to believe that they got there because they're smarter, because they picked themselves up by their bootstrap. It wasn't the $1 million loan they got from their parents. Oh, they paid off all of their debt because they moved into their rich family members' loft and didn't have to pay rent. And so they got to stack all, it's like these ridiculous narratives that push them to, or that try to get us to believe that white people are doing better at things than we are. And that's why they're succeeding and we aren't. And just the last thing is it's actually really sad, because he fought like hell. And what happens is Black people are targeted and discriminated against, and then we're told that we're deficient. He's gonna have a mark against his record. Now he's getting paid. So if you're not guilty, then why the hell are you paying this man to march for 2 more years if you're not guilty? But it doesn't matter, because on record, he has a mark against him. And this happens to Black people across the board. I mean, there was a story about a Black woman, professor and doctor who worked for Kaiser, and she led a class that she was asked to lead after the George Floyd protests about racism and medical racism and things like that. And then she was fired because somebody complained. One of her students complained about the class that she was asked to lead, and she still hasn't gotten her job back. and they said that she was deficient in her job. It's funny how these deficiencies spring up out of nowhere as soon as racism becomes involved, or as soon as allegations of racism, or as soon as discrimination becomes a part of it. Then all of a sudden, the person who's been perfectly fine all along is deficient. So there's so many levels of insidiousness here. And I don't know how we really fight it, because there's a huge, almost insatiable appetite for it right now. And it's only getting bigger.
It's interesting, Keith. I interviewed Dr. Michael Eric Dyson. Was it Monday? I think it was Monday or Tuesday. And he talked about being on Bill Maher's show this past weekend. And, Bill Maher is on this critical race theory rampage. And one of the things that Dr. Michael Eric Dyson said, and I'm paraphrasing here, you can look at the video on my YouTube page, which is getting a bunch of heinous comments. I mean, I can't believe posting a video of Michael Eric Dyson on my YouTube page. It's being inundated with, he's a race baiter. It just, Dr. Michael Eric Dyson is the most calm, nice, uses his words and references hip hop, like whatever. It's wild to me. But one of the things he said, that we're getting this even from so-called allies, so-called allies. And this is a person who allegedly, Bill Maher, is an ally, but he's saying things like, why can't we be colorblind? I mean, I thought everybody knew we don't want to be colorblind. We want to be able to see color and accept it. There isn't an issue seeing color. So you have a bias associated with color. So here we have people who are falling for the okie doke, or maybe they always fell for it. Now it's just more obvious now. But is there a tactic that we can use? Why can't the Democratic side use a fear tactic? Or is that just not going to work for us in any capacity? Like, can't we scare our base to come out for us? They find ways to terrify their base. Can't we scare our base too? I mean, maybe a little bit of fear works.
Well, the saying from Audre Lorde, the master's tools will not dismantle the master's house. I suppose we could use fear tactics as well on the left, but why? I mean, I think ultimately, fear is a stronger motivator than hope, no doubt about it. But what does that build you in the end? You build a society based on fear. And I think what we need to build is Dr. King's beloved community, a society that's based on hope, that's based on love, that's based on treating people equally and being inclusive and representative. And that's a harder thing to sell to people, especially in times of trouble. It's, all it takes is a little bit of economic tension, or somebody's gas prices to go up, or somebody have a little inconvenience not being able to walk in the grocery store without having to wear a mask, and people get upset about things. When things are okay, you can promote messages of love and healing, and people are willing to accept that. But you get a little bit of tension and turmoil, and they're not as willing to accept it. So I understand the frustration, and I encourage Democrats and people on the left in general to fight harder. For sure, but I don't think they need to fight with the same tactics that the right uses, because I don't think that wins us anything in the end. We just have to be, I think we have to be more determined in our fight and less willing to back down from what we believe. And I think oftentimes Democrats start bargaining and negotiating against ourselves. We don't necessarily fight as hard as we want, because we think, oh, well, this person might not want it, that person might not want it. Who cares? Fight, say what you believe and fight for it. And if people don't like it, who cares? You still got to push for it anyway. And I go back to the example, I was just talking about this last night to some people about marriage equality. And I was saying how 10 years ago, marriage equality was not the norm in our country. President Obama didn't even support marriage equality 10 years ago. But because they were activists in the LGBTQ community who pushed this issue, when a lot of Democrats in the early 2000s didn't want to have anything to do with it, they made this thing happen. So I say, by all means, don't be afraid to push for whatever it is you think you want, and don't do it in a negative way, a fearful way, but do it in a positive way of promoting the kind of world we want to be, using the prefigurative politics of creating the world that we want to be as we're working to make it happen.
I hear you. That's probably the right way. That's why I couldn't be a politician.
Probably. You don't want to go that route. Yeah.
No, it is. But I'm like, go hard. But you're right. We can't use master's tools. You're right. That's We got to always remember that as we're frustrated and upset and outraged and confused, and here we go again, using master's tools, it's just not going to work. It's just not going to work. So we got to always be sure we keep that in mind. Okay, let's do one quick call.
Wait, can I say one thing?
Oh, go ahead, please.
I'll be
go ahead.
so quick. I'll be so quick. I do want to say I'm actually tired of the fear tactics that we have to use. And we're rightfully saying, vote or die, vote like your life depends on it. Like, I need Democrats to give us something else, because I'm not going to spend 2022 saying, Black people, we need you to vote like that. Like, that's not going to work. Give us something affirmative to actually go out and sell. And then the other thing I want to say is we have to be as organized in our messaging and in our delivery as the racists are. That video of Michael Eric Dyson, the racists are organized. They have their troll farms. They have their all the organizations.
Yes.
They are on messaging. They're on messaging about Kyle Rittenhouse. We need to get information, and we need to be organized, and we need to be as relentless as they are about pushing their messages of critical race theory and white supremacy and whatever else they want to do.